All right, well, it is 11 o'clock, so we want to get started right on time. We may have a couple more people trickle in as we get into this, but I think that it is time to get started. So thank you so much for joining us for our workplace webinar on group travel insurance pitfalls and solutions. So allow me to introduce myself. My name is Krista Barzso. I have been in the insurance industry specializing in group benefits for over 10 years. I'm currently with Accurate Design Benefits, which is a boutique group benefits brokerage with over 30 years in the business. And we take a bit of a different approach to group benefits, and really, we like to take the time to work one-on-one with our plan administrators to help them design and implement custom benefits and risk management solutions that help them support their benefits philosophy rather than trying to fit a standard product to every situation. We also like to make sure that we take the time to educate our clients about changes in the industry that could influence their plan or items that could cause them concern in the future. This can be done at renewal time with our industry updates discussion or through a separate phone call, blog post, a newsletter, or even a dedicated webinar like this one when we really want to get into a subject. So today we're going to be talking about travel insurance. This came about because we received a lot of questions about this from our clients, especially with summer weather and summer vacations coming up right around the corner. We thought that this would be the perfect time to address those questions. So today we're going to be looking at the ins and outs of group insurance, travel coverage, and how to know if you may need to look into an additional individual travel policy to top up your coverage for a certain trip. To help me with this, I will be joined by Gail Roberts, who is a subject matter expert in individual travel insurance. She's with MSH Americas, and she's going to give us the expert opinion from the individual travel coverage side of the equation. So as we get started here, I am actually going to turn off our video just to make the to reduce the bandwidth that the presentation is going to require. When we get to the end to the question and answer, I'll turn our videos back on so you can see us again. But that was a comment that came out of our last webinar, was that it was just slowing down the connection. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen again this time. So to begin, I just wanted to do a quick overview of the underlying philosophy of group benefits. A lot of times people assume that group insurance means that everybody in the group is covered for everything that they need. And this is simply not the case. When you have a group plan, it is designed to provide an adequate amount of coverage for what most people would need. So if you look at your bell curve, somewhere in the middle is what it's going to cover the best. It's not, however, designed to cover every single need for every single person. So if you take life insurance, for example, a group plan might have a plan design that says everybody gets coverage equal to 1 times their salary, maybe to a maximum of $100,000. So for most people, that's going to give them that one-time salary coverage. But if you had a high earning executives who's in the high 6 figures, they would not get that one-time salary coverage and they would need to purchase extra coverage. But even for the employees who are getting their full salary coverage in that scenario, it doesn't take into account each individual's family situation. It would provide some coverage to everyone, but would it be enough for your specific needs? If you have a spouse, children, a mortgage, or specific assets you wanted to protect, you might need to buy a separate policy to top up that coverage and customize it for your specific situation. So as a side note, if anybody's wondering about how that would work or how that would apply to, say, disability or CI coverage, because that can be the same thing, please reach out to me after the seminar and we can arrange a special needs assessment session with one of our specialists. But this same situation is true of travel insurance. For most people in good health, going on a typical vacation for an average amount of time, the coverage in a group plan should be sufficient. But if you're venturing outside that average or normal or typical application, you might need to look into a slightly different solution. But how do you know if your trip falls outside that range? Well, stay tuned to find out. Like I said, we're going to today dig into exactly that. So we're going to look at also the differences between group coverage and individual insurance, and discuss the advantages and limitations of each so that you are going to be able to make the best possible decisions when you're planning your next trip. And one thing I just wanted to mention as we go through this presentation is that individual insurance can actually come in two main forms. There's the traditional single trip coverage, which is what most people would think about when they think of travel insurance, that they're going on a vacation, they want coverage for that vacation, and then when you come home, the policy's over and that's the end of it. But there is also a multi-trip version that you could purchase and you pay for monthly, and it is always in play behind the scenes. It allows you a certain number of trips up to a maximum duration throughout the year, and you don't have to reapply every time. You don't have to notify your insurance carrier before you travel. It's really great for people who are frequently traveling. But I just wanted to point that out because as we talk about individual insurance, that would cover both of those options, and which one would be best for you would depend very much on your specific situation. So first and foremost, a note I just wanted to make is that you're going to see these screenshots of actual contract wording. They've been taken from existing contracts. Some are from individual, some are from group. We're not going to highlight which policies they are because the contracts are constantly subject to change. So when you are looking for travel insurance, you want to make sure that you understand and read the contract wording for the policy that you're actually buying at the time that you're buying it. So the first area that we wanted to examine is stability and pre-existing condition clauses on your plan. These are clauses that many people are not even aware of. And if they're not understood, though, it could mean that the policy that you're counting on when you travel has actually been rendered null and void. So we really wanted to just take a moment to highlight them. So first, let's talk about just what they mean. These two terms are often used interchangeably, but they are actually two separate issues. So first, stability, as it sounds, refers to how stable your current medical situation is. Whatever your medical situation is, how stable you are, which seems very simple. But a seemingly routine situation like suddenly having a new symptom that you're maybe not too worried about, and maybe you haven't spoken to your doctor about it yet, but you do have the symptom and you're experiencing it and you don't know what it is. Or maybe you have had your doctor recommend some tests that you should have when you get back from your trip. Or maybe your doctor has increased a dose of a medication that you're taking, or decreased a dose of a medication that you're taking, or shifted to a different medication than your usual one, having some medical tests done and you're still waiting for the results, or talking about a doctor or talking to a doctor about some concerns of yours right before a trip can all mean that you're not medically stable. So we'll talk about what that actually means for your next trip on the next slide. A pre-existing condition, again, pretty self-explanatory but slightly different, is a condition that existed before the time of travel, but it's not necessarily just conditions that you are aware of. It could also include conditions that you may not yet have received a diagnosis for, if you are having symptoms that haven't been fully explained or treated, or if they feel that that any rational person in your situation experiencing your symptoms would have sought medical treatment before the trip. Those can all mean that you have a pre-existing condition, and coverage may or may not include those specific conditions when you travel. So how does this affect your purchasing of a travel policy? So depending on your contract, you may need your medical status to be stable for up to 6 months prior to departure. So more common, I'd say, is 3 months, especially in the group space, but this is where it becomes very important to read your contract, because it could be, as you can see on the screen, it could be up to 6 months. But what if you have had a change of health within that 3 to 6 months? Do you automatically have to cancel your trip? Not necessarily. This is an area where individual insurance can really help out a lot. So I'm going to turn it over to Gail. Could you speak to some of the different features that some individual plans have that could address these issues?
Absolutely. So with any individual travel plan, the stability parameters can vary. So it can be anywhere from, I've seen as low as 7 days to 30 to 60 to 90. We even have plans that are a full year of stability is required. So sometimes the stability is based on the age of the traveler. It can also be based on just the duration of the trip. So a lot of the time, if you're going on a shorter trip, sometimes the stability period will be a little shorter. So it really depends on the plan. Also be careful of the definition of stable, because the definition of stable can also change depending on the policy that you're looking at. So just make sure that you understand how stable is defined in your particular policy. Talk through it with a professional if you're not sure if that applies to you. Also good to know, some plans will actually disregard the stability clause if you're just traveling within Canada, but you're going outside of your home province, which means you wouldn't have to be stable for any length of time with your pre-existing condition. So that can be really beneficial if you're just doing a lot of traveling within Canada.
Great, thank you. Okay, so with that, we're going to shift over to our next area of concern. Dun, dun, dun. So who has ever enjoyed an alcoholic beverage on vacation? Everybody? If you're saying no right now, I'm going to go ahead and not believe you. So I'm going to just say it's everybody. This is something I always like to mention when talking about travel insurance because it is so incredibly common. But would interest you to know that many individual policies do not cover some injuries or ailments that are related to alcohol consumption. This is one area where group might have a bit of an advantage as far as coverage goes because they're still very vague about the wording surrounding the use of alcohol, and often the group plan won't have this type of exclusion. But Gail, could you speak to exactly how that might play into an individual policy?
Yes. So with individual travel plans, they usually expressly exclude coverage for anything that's related to, something sustained while you were under the influence. That could include alcohol or drugs. It could even include prescription medication if you're abusing it in any way. This could include if you trip on the stairs, going back up to your room in an all-inclusive resort, for example, you've had a fun night at the bar, and you wind up needing stitches because you've injured yourself. If they determine that you were under the influence and that's what caused the injury, they could very well deny your claim on the basis that you were under the influence at the time of the incident. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that, if you have a glass of wine with dinner, that the exclusion applies, but it does mean that the insurance company is going to likely examine your claim a little bit more closely to make sure that that wasn't a factor. Now, if you were, say, to injure yourself, and it was completely unrelated to the alcohol in your system or what have you, they might not necessarily say that it was related and deny that claim, but it is very important to be careful with your consumption to make sure that, you avoid those types of situations.
Yeah. And again, like this isn't to scare anybody. We just want to make sure that everyone understands the coverage that they do have in place so that they can make the right decisions while they're away. Speaking of decisions that you need to make while you're away, one of the common things that people are faced with is special, exciting activities. So this is super common. If you've ever been to an all-inclusive resort, you've probably seen vendors selling these types of activities along the beach, or if you've ever done an adventure holiday, there are usually day trip providers offering, canyoneering, hang gliding, whitewater rafting, bungee jumping, or any other crazy things they can come up with to get your adrenaline going. But these can fall under a hazardous activity clause in the contract. So here is an example that I've pulled. So the vast majority of these activities are excluded under the majority of travel policies, and this is individual or group insurance. These activities fall in that atypical, not average coverage on the outsides of the bell curve that we were talking about before. But that's not to worry. If you are really excited about your upcoming adventure vacation, you can absolutely find coverage that will include these types of activities. It's just probably not included under the default policy on your group plan, for example. Similarly with pro sports, you might not think you're a professional athlete, but what happens if you injure yourself while playing beach volleyball in a hotel tournament that you were awarded a cash prize for? Technically, that's being paid to perform in an athletic competition. So what does your contract say about that is important to know. Does a bottle of alcohol count as a remuneration under your policy, or does it have to be cash? There are specialty products for these activities as well. But this is, again, the kind of thing where you really want to discuss your intended activities with an expert so that they can help you make sure you buy a specialty product that expressly includes these activities. Gail, could you speak to what that would look like for people?
Sure. So with sporting activities, we do have a couple of products that offer riders that you can purchase as an additional coverage to cover those sports. Usually they'll have a list of which sports are covered, and if they're not expressly listed in that list of sports, then they're usually not covered under the policy. Now, the definition of professional can differ from policy to policy as well, so make sure you know how the word professional is defined in the case of your policy. Sometimes it means that the participant is considered professional by the governing body of their sport. Sometimes this means that they're compensated for their participation in a monetary sense, or they either make all or a large part of their income from participating in that sport. So that also depends on the policy that you're looking at, what they consider to be professional and whether they include or exclude those types of sports. Things like golf, those are not included in hazardous sports. Usually those are just covered by the regular policy. But things like mountaineering, scuba diving, unless you're certified, skydiving, whitewater rafting, paragliding, and parasailing, those are pretty common sports that are typically excluded. So if they are excluded under your policy, find out if there's a rider that you can purchase to have those things covered, or find out if there's another specialty product on the market that you can get. Currently, we have two different insurance companies that do offer that type of thing, so I know it's out there. So yeah, it's important to know what activities you're partaking in while you're traveling so that you can plan ahead for that, and speak to a professional, because they can shop the market for you, they know what's out there, and they can help you find the right product.
Excellent. All right. So the next topic that we're going to talk about is specific, not so much what you're doing while you're away, but where you're going, which is to consider travel advisories. So can you go anywhere you want, whenever you want, considering that you have a group policy? Not necessarily. So this is another area that applies to both group and individual policies. If the government has determined that it is dangerous to travel to a certain country, they will issue a travel advisory for that area. And there are different levels of these advisories. So you can see a couple are listed here in this contract wording. So avoiding non-essential travel or avoiding all travel. There's other levels as well. And how a policy handles each of those different levels will vary from company to company. So it's important to know how your policy handles that, and also if there is an advisory listed for the place that you're going to. You can check the updated list with the first link there from the Government of Canada's website. So if you have a group plan and you're Canadian, it's going to be the Government of Canada's website. But Gail, you said there's occasions where they might need to check the US.
Yes, so we offer a couple of plans that are from US providers. So in their situation, their policy is determined by the US travel advisories. So those are going to be found on the travel.state.gov website for the US Department of State.
Okay, so it's important to know where the company that's issuing your policy, where they're located, so that you can
exactly
check the correct site. With a travel advisory, what does that actually mean for you? If they're in place, some policies will exclude coverage altogether. Some policies will just say, if there's a travel advisory, we're not covering you, you're on your own. Some other companies will still intend to provide coverage, but they just might not be able to, depending on how bad the conditions are. So for example, if all flights have been grounded, it doesn't matter if your policy says that you are covered to be flown back home if you are injured. They just physically won't be able to provide that coverage, or getting an air ambulance to you, even if that's part of your policy, may just be physically impossible. However, again, you're not out of luck if you absolutely need to travel to an area with an advisory. There are policies for that if traveling to these areas is unavoidable. It's definitely, however, in these situations, advisable to contact an expert to help you look into these types of high-risk products that could allow for coverage in these areas, which Gail's going to speak to now.
Yeah, so we offer a couple of options for special risk traveling. Normally, these options are available for business travel only. Those are situations where, an employee is sent away to a country that may have a travel advisory, and this is part of their job to go there. So for leisure travelers, I would probably recommend, avoid travel, go by the advisory, either exercise a high degree of caution or just avoid travel until maybe the advisory is lifted, just to be safe. But for companies sending their employees overseas to places that may have a travel advisory, we do have an option for that. It's very customizable. It's tailored to the specific person who's traveling. Many times they'll want to know what their security situation is, if they're bringing any security detail with them. And it's important to know as well that even if you do have a regular policy, a regular travel policy, your policy may not actually be null and void if there is a travel advisory. A lot of companies will handle travel advisories with an exclusion, where there will just be an exclusion for anything related to the advisory. So for example, if you were traveling to an area where there was an advisory due to the Zika virus, if you were to contract that virus while you were traveling, any expenses you incurred due to that would not be covered because it was part of the advisory. If you were in the same place where there's a travel advisory for the Zika virus and you injure yourself, say you step off the curb the wrong way, you twist an ankle, something like that, that would still be covered under your regular benefits because it's not related to the travel advisory. So it's just important to know how the advisory works and what your coverage looks like if you're traveling to a place with an advisory.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so our next area is medical questionnaires. So this is one area that people often don't think about, but with a group plan, you never have to worry about filling out the medical questionnaires for your travel coverage as long as you have qualified to be a part of the group plan. Then you have the coverage that it states in your benefits booklet. Individual plans can provide better flexibility for activities and stability options, and some other things that we're going to be talking about soon. But with some of them, there might be some kind of an application process. Sometimes it's very easy, sometimes a bit more complex. So I just wanted to give Gail an opportunity if you could just speak to the application process and how in-depth or simplistic it can be.
Yes, this is a big one. So with medical questionnaires, they are very tailored to the individual in the sense that, with a group plan, they're designed to cover many people, and medical underwriting is typically done at the time of a claim. So you won't really know, what your coverage for a particular condition is going to be until there's a claim sometimes. With individual travel plans, this is done at the time of application. So questionnaires can range anywhere from 6 questions to 20 questions or even longer. Many travelers under the age of 55 or 60 will not actually have to complete one. So it does depend on the age of the traveler, and sometimes it'll depend on the length of the trip as well, whether one needs to be completed or not. Even for those 60 years though, there are some policies that don't require a medical questionnaire, but again, you're going with the assumption that you're covered without actually going through those questions in the first place. The answers that are provided on a medical questionnaire could affect your coverage in a couple of ways. First of all, the premium could be higher if you disclose, that you have a few medical conditions. Again, this will depend on the nature of the questions and on the policy that you're applying for. But it could determine that your condition is a higher risk for complications, and they may add an additional premium for that. They may also add additional exclusions or limitations on your coverage, and it also may affect the stability period that applies to you. Many questionnaires will put you in a category of risk, and that will affect your premium and your stability period. Answering truthfully and accurately is so important when it comes to medical questionnaires. I cannot stress that enough. If you're not sure about an answer, don't guess. Check with your medical health professional for guidance. Make sure that you're accurately answering them to the best of your abilities. If there is any non-disclosure or there are any mistakes on the questionnaire, this could result in a $15,000 deductible or more being added to your policy at the time of a claim. It could even result in your coverage being rendered null and void if it's answered incorrectly.
So it's super important to pay attention to, which I would say applies to any kind of insurance product that you're buying. If you're filling
Absolutely.
out questionnaires, they don't take kindly to misrepresentation generally. So very important. Very important.
Yes.
Okay. The next subject, this is one that is near and dear to my heart because it's one that I hear all the time. So I'm very excited for Gail to get to speak about it. But that is credit card coverage. If I had a nickel for every time I heard, it's okay, I booked my ticket on my credit card, even if my group plan doesn't cover me, or my credit card will for sure. So to me, coming from the insurance side, this is just as bad as people who tell me they don't need life insurance because they bought the mortgage insurance at the bank, which is a whole other thing. I won't get on that subject. If you have questions about it, please talk to me. I would love to chat about it. But I thought the best way to handle this would be to have a travel insurance expert weigh in on the pros and cons of credit card coverage and when it's good to rely on it and when maybe not so much. So Gail, I will pass it over to you.
Yes, we see this a lot. A lot of our clients do have existing credit card coverage, and they're not really aware of what the limitations are on that coverage. So it's great. A lot of credit cards will offer a emergency medical benefit. A lot of them will also include non-medical benefits, things like trip cancellation, trip interruption, maybe even a baggage or an accidental death and dismemberment coverage. The problem with it is that it's not tailored to the individual. So the medical emergency assistance coverage is going to be pretty minimal. It's going to be, your basic type of product that's going to cover the majority of travelers. It could also have limitations on the number of days that you can travel using that coverage. A lot of them are limited to either 8 or 15 days per trip. So of course, if you're traveling longer than that, you're going to need to look at a top-up insurance. So we do a lot of top-up insurance on credit card plans. We'll usually need to know the number of days that they have covered, and then we can extend their coverage from there with a different product. With the non-medical benefits as well, for the trip cancellation in particular, because it's more like a group plan, it's not designed for each individual's trip. So it usually has a limit on the trip cancellation amount that you're covered for, and you usually don't get to choose. So with an individual plan, you can customize it to your trip. You can cover, the exact amount that you've put down for your trip to insure you against any loss. You can tailor it to what you need. You can choose just trip cancellation and interruption, or you can add a baggage benefit. You can add an accidental death and dismemberment benefit as well. So it is good to tailor your coverage to exactly what you need. These credit cards can be a good jumping off point, but I do find that they're usually a little bit lacking in what they offer.
And definitely wouldn't cover any of those hazardous activities or anything like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mentioned. All right. So our next area, another thing that I hear very often. There we go. My teenager is registered as a dependent on my group plan, so that travel coverage will cover them during their exchange year abroad. I hear this all the time. There are a few issues with these assumptions. So from the group benefits perspective, your group plan has a limit to the number of days per trip that it will cover you. when you go abroad, when they go abroad, your dependent will be subject to that same trip duration limitation. So if you look in your booklet, it would say that the maximum trip length is 30, 60, or 180 days. It used to always be 180 days, but we're seeing shorter and shorter times, sometimes even 14 days. Most students are gone for a year or sometimes longer. So obviously, even the longest one, even if you have 180 days, it's probably not going to be long enough. Furthermore, the province of Ontario demands that you not be out of the province for more than 212 days, which is roughly 7 months, in any 12-month period, if you want your OHIP coverage to remain valid. So if your dependent is going to be away longer than that, and their absence is not properly planned for, they could lose their OHIP coverage altogether, which causes an even bigger problem. The first rule of eligibility for any member of a group insurance plan is that they have to be covered under OHIP or an equivalent provincial insurance plan. So losing their OHIP coverage because they're gone too long would mean that not only do they not have the travel coverage while they're abroad if they've stayed past the maximum trip length, but it would also mean that they're no longer covered under their group plan at all. Even once they've returned home, they would have no coverage until their OHIP coverage was reinstated. So if they came home and then immediately there was a car accident or some kind of random illness, there would be no help from the group plan and also no help from the provincial plan. You'd be completely on your own for that. So it's really, really important to make sure that for these prolonged absences that you are talking to an expert and really helping to plan for that and make sure that you find a coverage solution that works. There are solutions that will work, but you have to plan for them and put them in place. And this would apply equally to any employees that are being sent away for a year or more as well. So Gail's going to talk now about some of those solutions that could help your employees or your dependents who are going to be out of the country for a year or more, because it's, like I said, it's so important in these situations to really make sure that the correct solution is chosen and planned for ahead of time. So Gail, I'll pass it over to you.
Yes, with students, a lot of companies are offering individual student plans that you can purchase that really suit the needs of an international student specifically. We here have options for incoming international students who are coming to Canada to study, and we also offer solutions for outbound students who are going abroad to study. A lot of the time, these plans will include special benefits that you wouldn't normally see in something like a regular Canadian traveler's plan. They could include routine medical checkups, dental and vision care. A lot of the time, you'll have a mental health and counseling benefit and tutoring services as well. One of the great things about student plans is they also offer coverage for intramural sports a lot of the time. So they're really tailored towards what a student is going to need when they're traveling. A lot of them also allow for back and forth travel. So you want to make sure that whatever plan you get, that you know what the travel plans are. So if a student is planning on being away for the entire year, they're not coming back for any holidays or vacations, then that's fine if they have just a one-year policy or something like that. If they want to do a lot of back and forth travel, though, you'll want to make sure that your policy accounts for that and allows for that. If you have a policy, for example, if they return home for too long, their policy is going to lapse, and that's going to cause an issue. So make sure that you just know what your policy allows for as far as going back and forth between your home country and the country of study. The other thing about the OHIP coverage that I wanted to mention is some of our plans don't actually require that you maintain your OHIP, but for the ones that do, we have a lot of students and a lot of expatriates who, when they know they're going to be out of Ontario for an extended period, they will usually approach the Ontario Service Ontario and get their coverage under OHIP extended. You can do this for up to 2 years, I believe, if you're studying or working abroad.
Yeah. And I just wanted to throw in as well a little bonus tidbit of information. These kinds of issues around OHIP and group coverage, it would also apply to any foreign employees you've hired and brought over to Canada. They won't be able to go on your group plan until they have some kind of provincial insurance replacement. So that's just something to keep in mind, a little bonus for you. All right, so but speaking of OHIP, we also wanted to just point out that there have been some significant changes proposed to the way the program is going to be handling out of country claims. I'm sure you've heard some of the news headlines about this. They're currently scheduled to take effect as of October 1st and will be affecting people who are looking for coverage outside of the country. So as someone who deals with travel insurance on an individual level and sees firsthand how people rely on the OHIP coverage and how it impacts people's decisions to purchase travel insurance, I'm going to let Gail speak to the details of this issue.
Yes, we've had a lot of conversation about this recently. So if these changes do go through, essentially what they're talking about is removing the out-of-country coverage from our OHIP plans entirely. So at the moment, what they usually cover for inpatient services, for intensive care, it's up to about $400 a day. For other inpatient services, about $200 a day. And as well as a $50 per day limit for emergency outpatient services. So without that coverage, people are going to be having to either pay that portion themselves, or the insurance, the private insurance company is going to have to be taking over more of the claim. So a lot of people rely on their OHIP coverage to cover them when they're abroad. But even with the benefits that we currently have, it only covers a small portion of the expenses. Especially if you're hospitalized, it could run into thousands of dollars per day just for a room, let alone medical expenses and the services of the physician and the nurses and everything. So it's always been important to get individual travel insurance, even if you're just traveling within Canada but to a different province, because of those limitations. And now that they're kind of removing this safety net, or at least discussing the possibility of removing it, I think it's going to force a lot of people to think really carefully about how their coverage is affected when they leave the country. They're also talking about many policies maybe needing to change their policy wording, as most Canadian travel plans at the moment do require that you maintain your government health insurance while you're away in order for the policy to remain valid. It's usually part of the eligibility that you have valid government health insurance in order to purchase. Many plans are talking about possible rate increases up to about 7% over the next couple of years. So I mean, it does affect a large group of travelers, and I think overall it's going to be having people be more careful about knowing what they're covered for and making sure that they get that individual insurance as well.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Although I have heard that the insurance companies are pushing back the deadline that they've set, because October 1st isn't enough time for them to all change their contracts. And
yeah, that's right. It's a big change for a lot of policies. So I'm sure they need a little bit more time on that. We've actually done a video recently at MSH Americas. We have a video coming up on our blog soon. It's not live yet, but it should be very soon. So you can keep checking back on the blog on anglinternational.com.
Okay, so those are the main areas that we wanted to talk about. What I'd like to do now is just do a little bit of a recap now that we've outlined all these areas where you may want to be a little bit more concerned. What can you do about these things? So first and foremost, read your contract. When you are buying a contract, it's very, very important to understand, because all of those issues that we talked about are going to be handled very differently depending on which company you're working with and what they state in their wording. So make sure you understand the actual product that you're purchasing and if it covers what you need it to cover. If you have any questions about it, you can call the help number on your policy. You can call the people at MSH Americas. They're very knowledgeable and they can help you with all the nitty-gritty details on your travel insurance contracts. It's a great idea 24 hours before you leave to check the travel advisory status of your intended destination. Those things change all the time as well. You never know when issues are going to erupt in any part of the world. So it's very important to check. Also, just wanted to mention that just because there's a travel advisory for part of the country, it doesn't necessarily mean that that entire country is under advisory. So it's very important to get very granular and see like very specifically where you're going and if that's covered by an advisory. Making sure that the activities you want to participate in are covered by your policy. If you're going to go skydiving, get a policy that includes skydiving. It's available. It's just something you have to seek out. I also highly recommend everybody get trip cancellation insurance when you're booking your trip. I used to always think that it was just if like I changed my mind and wanted to cancel, but I was like, no, I'm going on this trip. I'm looking forward to it. I'm never going to cancel. But these unexpected things can happen and you don't want to lose all the money that you've invested in your vacation. So if there is a last minute travel advisory, if there is some kind of health issue that arises and you're no longer safe to travel right before your trip, you don't want to have to deal with those things and also lose your trip. That way you could just reschedule it. Again, if you're unsure, call an expert. And one thing I did want to mention that's a little bit different because we've been focusing on how to know which policy to purchase. This point is about what to do at time of claim. So you've already purchased your policy, you're on your trip, something's gone wrong, and you are in need of medical care, for example. Make sure that you or someone you're traveling with calls the number on your policy, on your coverage card, as soon as possible, because when they're negotiating treatment options with another country, the insurance company wants to get involved as early as possible so that they can make sure that they negotiate those costs to keep them as low as they can. So if you have just gone through a whole range of tests that the insurance company didn't approve, they can choose whether or not they want to cover those things at that time. So you want to make sure, obviously if you're unconscious, they understand that you can't make those calls, but as soon as you're able to, get them involved so that they can negotiate on your behalf. Also, they usually have people who speak several languages. So if language is an issue in the area that you're traveling to, they can help with that, but you want to make sure that they can negotiate for you. So the most important takeaway here is I know we've spoken about a lot of technical potential issues today, but I want to highlight that travel insurance is not evil or tricky in any way. That's not the takeaway here. The travel insurance companies aren't sitting there trying to find a way to trick you out of your coverage and leave you stranded. In fact, most people that I talk to who specialize in this area have several stories of travel insurance companies paying claims that they really probably shouldn't have. So from what I've seen, the companies are going to try to cover you if they can, but that doesn't work if the products that you have purchased have been entirely misused, or if you've engaged in activity that you don't even have coverage for, they can't help you. No, it doesn't matter if you have the best car insurance on the market. If your house burns down, it's not going to cover you. And that's kind of what happens when people purchase the wrong type of coverage. So today we just wanted to highlight some of the most common areas where these situations might arise so that you're better equipped to choose the right coverage for your situation, or even if you're just better equipped to know when you need help to find the best solution for your situation, that is definitely a win. And again, just remember, because if your trip isn't covered by your group plan, that doesn't mean that it can't be covered. It just means that it falls outside the average and you might need some extra top up insurance to make sure that you can have that peace of mind while you travel. High risk policies and individual or custom options exist if you ask a specialist. And it's just, I know sometimes it seems like a bit of a hassle to go through all like the research and the application, but it's so much better to go through that hassle beforehand than to find out once it's too late that you don't have the coverage that you think you have.
Absolutely. I think this all boils down to just making sure that you're informed about your coverage, never assuming that everything is covered. Just do your research, speak to a professional. We have a great team here that are very knowledgeable. We can, help you sort out what it is that you need and what's out there for you.
Great. And with that, that's the end of our main portion of our presentation. So I wanted to thank everybody so much for joining us today. We're going to be moving into our Q&A, but before we do that, I just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items in case anybody has to run early. I know we're right before lunch, but please keep an eye on your inbox over the next couple of days. We're going to be sending out an email as soon as the replay of this webinar goes live. Please feel free to share this link with any of your employees, any colleagues, or even friends or family who might find it useful, anyone you know who could use a bit more information about traveling, anyone who's doing one of these outside the norm types of vacations. Please also keep an eye out for a survey that'll be going out soon. We would really value your feedback on how you found this webinar and also on what types of topics you'd like us to cover in our future workplace webinars. We really want them to be of value to you. So we want to make sure that we're covering the subjects that would be the most helpful for where you are in your insurance journey. Our next session is going to be coming up in September. So we would love to be able to take that feedback and turn it into our next webinar. Also, please feel free to reach out to us after the session today if you have any specific questions. Let me pull up our contact info now. For any group insurance, life, LTD, or CI related questions, please reach out to me, Krista, for anything related to individual travel coverage. The team of specialists at MSH Americas would be thrilled to help you. The contact information is under Gail's photo there. If you have a question for Gail specifically after the webinar, please email that to me and I'll make sure it gets to her. And more information about any of these products can be found on our brand new travel microsite. The link is there at the bottom of the slide, which is powered by the amazing folks at MSH Americas, and will also include their contact information if you don't manage to get it down from the slide today. So with that being said, are there any questions today? There's a group chat panel if you want to type them in. While you guys are thinking of some, I have one for you, Gail. I wanted to know if you could tell me what is the number one misconception that you find when people are looking at travel information or travel insurance or looking for more information?
Oh, that's a good one. Probably the number one thing I've experienced is people relying on their government health insurance. So I know people are going to be a lot more careful with that coming up because of all of these changes to the OHIP coverage. But there are still several provinces where that type of thing isn't going to happen, at least not in the foreseeable future. So I see a lot of clients who assume that they're covered for everything under the government health insurance, and they assume they need to get coverage on top of that. So I always recommend additional travel insurance, even if you're traveling just within Canada. Canadian plans as well can be really cost effective. They're usually less expensive premium wise than an international traveling policy. A lot of the time, you can get unlimited travel within Canada if you're getting a multi-trip option. So there are some great options available for within Canada travel. There's no reason to go without it, in my opinion.
Excellent. Okay, we do have another question coming in. So what happens if I get sick right before my trip and I have a stability clause? How do I make sure that I'm covered?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it depends on how soon before your trip you discover that you're sick. Sometimes if it's,
And how sick.
Yeah, and how sick, exactly. It depends on a number of factors, and really it comes down to what policy you have. So if you get sick right before a trip, sometimes, if you've got cancellation insurance, you can look into, recouping some of your costs. With the stability clause, though, it's usually going to exclude any coverage for that particular illness if you get sick too close to your trip. So that's why we do recommend cancellation insurance in case, something like that happens. We also do have optional riders for stability that you can sometimes add to your policy, and that could lower your stability clause to as low as 7 days. So that could be an option for travelers. If you have at least 7 days of stability, you could still get coverage for that condition.
Yeah.
Otherwise, as a general rule, nothing related to that condition is going to be covered if it doesn't meet the stability clause.
Also, even if you're outside the 7 days, like you have to be stable for that amount of time. So if you're actively going through some kind of illness, it won't be covered.
Exactly.
You have to be like, you have to have gotten sick and then either like recovered and then be stable for 7 days, or wherever you are in your journey, like you need whatever's happening to you can't be still happening. You need it to have stabilized. And also your doctor needs to be able to sign off that you are fit for travel. So you might have stabilized at a very weak point and you're not yet ready for travel. That wouldn't count, which I think most people get in terms of common sense, but sometimes there's just something you really want to do and you want to push through it. But if you're too sick to travel, you're too sick to travel. So
yeah. Also, there's always the issue of, is it considered a minor ailment? Because a lot of policies, if it's considered a minor ailment, then they won't actually consider it an unstable pre-existing condition. So these could be things like a cold or a kind of thing.
You don't have to cancel your trip because you got a cold.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So it just depends on the definition in your policy on a minor condition.
Right. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. So we will leave it there. Again, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We really look forward to your feedback. And once again, we will send out a link very soon in the next few days once we have this replay live on our YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it again, in case you missed anything the first time around, or if you want to, again, share it with anyone you would like to, please feel free to do so. And we look forward to hearing any of your questions through email afterwards. Have a great day.